Hi everyone, my name is Pierre. I am a mind trainer at Thanyapura. And in this recording, I want to talk to you about meditation, about mindfulness. When we want to meditate, when we want to become more mindful, we are going to definitely have to observe our thinking process. We're going to have to observe, and for a great deal that we realize already, that we think a lot. What is interesting is that a great deal of our thoughts are not original, are not useful, are negative. A great deal of our thought is what we consider to be rumination. It is believed that we have roughly 65,000 thoughts a day. Of these 65,000 thoughts, 10% are considered to be original. 90% is rumination, repetition. Through this rumination process, we often brew very negative thoughts about what we do. For an athlete, for actually anybody performing a task, for any students getting ready to do an exam, or anyone who is trying to mobilize all his intellectual capacities to accomplish a task at work, this rumination is a huge enemy. So when we want to meditate, the first thing we want to do is to really take a grasp of the effect that this rumination has on us, how it transforms us and how it becomes very negative. Our thinking process makes us realize the validity of our thought. Our thinking process is distorted. A great deal of our thought doesn't reflect the reality that we are living. There are many ways we distort our thoughts. Negativity is definitely one of this way. The brain isn't interested in our happiness. The brain couldn't care less whether we are happy or not. The interest of the brain is to make sure that we survive the day. So the brain will definitely pay way more attention to what happens in your day that is negative. Thinking cause us to fabricate emotions. Eventually, we could say that emotions are the results of our thoughts. We're going to feel something. In a way, we pay a great deal of time thinking about our feelings, our emotions, observing how we feel, how we emote. And what we don't realize is that we are paying more attention to the effect of the thought. It's a little bit like saying you go see a doctor and you have a cold and the doctor starts paying attention to the fact that you have a runny nose. If you fix the cold, the runny nose will disappear. So the runny nose is an effect, is not the cause of your problem. Very often we feel and we emote in a way. We could feel sad, we could feel we are not adequate enough. And we think that our thought that have generated this feeling are good because we say, well, this feeling is so real for me that these thoughts must be valuable, they must be real. What we don't realize is that these thoughts are very often wrong. They don't reflect our reality. That's why meditation pays so much attention to the thinking process. In a way, we would like to reduce this thinking process. We would like to make it more. When we train the mind, ultimately what we want to do is we want to become able to put our attention exactly where we want it to be. Our brain has developed an habit of rumination, of self-narration. If we let the brain operate by itself, it will simply fall back into these short habitual patterns that are detrimental to us. So it will ruminate. As it ruminates, it will create massive emotions in us, massive feelings that very often will be unpleasant. We can come back to one of the basic and one of the most important characteristics of the brain is that it can network in two ways. The brain networks in an experimental and in a narrative way. The experience basically has to do with what happens in your body. In that sense, what happens in your body is also including your five senses. Your five senses are important and they happen right at the surface of your eyes. Whatever I see is an object that will travel and touch the surface of my eye. Whatever I hear will touch the surface of my ear, and it's the same thing for all our other senses. So when we are networking in the experimental network, when the brain networks in this experimental network, what it does is that we are very aware of what is happening in the body. The other way the brain can network is a narrative network. The narrative network is made of narration, of self-thinking. What is powerful in meditation is that whatever technique we are going to use, and it also includes mindfulness, we are going to come back to the physical reality of the body. We tend to neglect the body. We tend to believe that it is just some kind of a bag of meat without any wisdom. The body has great advantages. It is wise and it is simple. It has simplicity. The mind is complex and very often unwise. So what we do in the meditation is that we try to come back to our physical reality. As we do this, we're going to observe that the self-narration disappears. As soon as you come back to your physical reality, the reality of the physical body, the self-narration will stop. Any kind of self-narration has an emotional component. What is powerful about mindfulness is that we cannot be mindful and add an emotional layer to what is happening in the physical body. Because it is interesting to realize that when we experience a physical sensation, this physical sensation becomes emotional, and it's very often due to the self-narration that we add. As we self-narrate, we add an emotional component to something that was fairly simple. It was just a physical reality. But now when we are caught into a world of narration, of thought, we add an emotional layer to all of this, and things that should be simple become very complicated. Meditation and mindfulness will allow us, when we develop this technique, to put our attention where we want it to be. And now we have a very detrimental habit, is that we put our attention a lot on our thoughts. And it generates a great deal of emotions in us and a great deal of feelings that are detrimental. Very often when we want to run, we want to compete. The more we practice this technique, the easiest it will become for us to be in the body. So the mind and the body in a way will become best friends. They will work together, and as they do, life will become simple. This is why, in a way, people would say that for athletes, competition is 90% the body, 10%. This is why for athletes, very often, we will say that when they training is 90% about the body and 10% about the mind. But when they compete, competition is a lot more about the mind. If we haven't trained the mind, we haven't been able to put the mind back into the body where it is needed, it will be very difficult to perform well when comes the time to compete. The mind will be very interested in your thoughts, very interested in the emotions associated with these thoughts, and very often it will destroy your practice. It will destroy what you already know, because your muscle memories have been very well developed, and there's nothing worse for your muscle memories than negative thinking. So training the mind is fundamental to this practice. Without training the mind, you expose yourself to become a victim of the brain, which will grab any kind of elements in days that are the most important one, when we have to make a big presentation or when we have to compete, and fabricate emotions that are simply based on thoughts that are wrong and distorted. Mind training essentially allows us to develop this capacity, this habit, to take away the load of emotion, the load of effect that is associated with physical sensation, and to stay with the physical reality of what we experience, which is simple and very often extremely wise. So in the sense, when the mind and the body becomes friend, we create the ideal conditions for the athlete to perform at its best.